Poverty is not losing money. Rather, poverty is losing what cannot be bought or sold. The heaviest wounds are those that come from a hand you thought would heal you. The person who emerges from adversity is different from the person who entered it, for just as fire acts upon gold, hardship acts upon men. The most dangerous snakes are those that shed their skin and speak like humans. But before we begin our exciting journey, I hope we can pause for a moment to get closer. Tell me now in the comments, from which country or which beautiful global city are you watching us? Welcome everyone, let's begin. My name is Ethan, and today I stand on the threshold of my 30th year. When people look at me now, they see the luxurious Italian suits, the fancy cars, and that sharp look I acquired from the fierce battles of the real estate market in Chicago. But for you to truly understand who I am, and for you to touch the wound that created this man you see, I must take you back to that day when my life split into two halves, a half that held warmth and a half inhabited by frost. I was 18, a young man standing at the door of life, surrounded by the unconditional love of my mother and father. We were a small family, just my older brother Jack and I, living in a beautiful home filled with laughter and the smell of the apple pies my mother baked on Sunday mornings. Jack was 10 years older than me, and I saw him as my role model, my unwavering support. But fate, gentlemen, has cruel ways of rearranging our cards. On a rainy night, the telephone rang, and that ring was an omen of misfortune that I realized only after it was too late. A horrific car accident on the highway, and in a fleeting moment, my father was gone, and my mother was gone. They didn't just leave, they took with them the safety, the childhood, and that warm blanket that shielded me from the world's harshness. I suddenly found myself an orphan, lost in a black suit too big for my age, standing before two fresh graves, tears carving ravines on my cheeks, while my brother Jack's hand patted my shoulder. I thought then that this hand was all I had left, and I didn't know it would be the hand that would push me towards the abyss. After the days of mourning ended, and the mourners faded away, the real chapter of the tragedy began. Jack was married to a woman named Loretta, a woman with beautiful features, but rigid like an ice statue, and eyes that saw nothing in people but tools or obstacles. As soon as the door of our big house closed on the three of us, everything changed. Due to the age difference, and because I was still a legal minor in some procedures, or perhaps because of my blind trust in him, Jack took over the management of everything. The inheritance, the bank accounts, and the house. I did not object, for he was my brother, my blood and flesh. But Loretta was the de facto ruler in the shadow. The features of my home began to change. The family photos that adorned the walls gradually disappeared and were replaced by cold, soulless abstract paintings. My mother's scent faded and was replaced by Loretta's pungent perfumes. But worse than the change in decor was the change in treatment. Loretta transformed from a sister-in-law into a jailer. She looked at me as if I were an insect encroaching on her private kingdom. She began to impose strict rules inside the house where I grew up. Don't enter the living room with your shoes. Don't sit here. Your TV volume is too high. I swallowed the insults in silence, preserving what was left of my relationship with my brother. And because, quite honestly, I was broken inside, unable to confront her. But the real cruelty manifested in the simplest of human rights, food. Loretta deliberately delayed lunch until evening and cooked quantities sufficient only for her and Jack. I would sit at the table, my eyes shifting between them, waiting for one of them to invite me, but she would occupy Jack with side conversations and artificial laughs, completely ignoring my presence. And if I dared to reach out for an extra piece of bread, she would give me a fiery look that made the bite catch in my throat like thorns. I remember a night I will never forget. Hunger was gnawing at my intestines like a wild beast. I hadn't eaten anything since the morning except a piece of dry bread. I waited until everyone went to sleep and crept like a thief in my house, my father's house. I walked on tiptoes toward the kitchen, opened the refrigerator very slowly so as not to make a sound, and the refrigerator light was the only light in that profound darkness. I reached out my hand to pick up leftover chicken from dinner. Suddenly, the kitchen light flashed on brightly, blinding me. I spun around, terrified, to find Loretta standing at the door, arms crossed, with a terrifying, malicious smile on her face. She screamed at me in a hissing, snake-like voice. "What do you think you're doing? Stealing food in the middle of the night like a rat?" The blood froze in my veins, and I tried to defend myself with a trembling voice. "I'm hungry, Loretta. I haven't eaten anything all day, and this is my father's house." She interrupted me sharply as she approached me, snatching the plate from my hand with force, causing the food to fall to the floor. I looked at the scattered food on the floor and at her eyes that lacked any trace of mercy. I wished at that moment that the earth would cleave open and swallow me. I waited for Jack to come out of his room, to hear the screaming, to come and defend his little brother, but the door to his room remained closed. Jack was there, I am sure of it, but he chose silence. He chose his arrogant wife over his brother's blood. That night, I returned to my room hungry, humiliated, and broken. I didn't cry because of the hunger. I cried because I realized the bitter truth. My father and mother had died, and today, my brother had died too, even if his body was still alive. Jack transformed in my eyes from a pillar of support to merely the shadow of a cruel woman. Days passed, and the situation worsened. I began to avoid leaving my room except when absolutely necessary. I turned into a ghost in the house. I could hear their laughter downstairs while I curled up in my bed, trying to forget the pain of my empty stomach. Loretta excelled in humiliating me, leaving me dirty cleaning chores and uttering hurtful words every time she saw me. "Why are you still here? When will you grow up and let us live our lives?" I endured, telling myself, "Bear it, Ethan. You have no other place. You are still young. The world outside is brutal." I was afraid of the unknown, and I was holding on to a thin thread of hope that my brother would come to his senses. But I didn't know that a conspiracy was being woven in the dark, a conspiracy that would uproot me and throw me into the unknown. I thought that hunger was the worst thing I could face, but the worst was yet to come. The worst is betrayal when it comes from those who bear your name. It was the calm before the storm that would change the course of my life forever, and which began with a conversation I overheard secretly. A conversation that sent chills through every cell of my body. This night passed like a heavy nightmare, but what followed was even heavier. I lived in my house like a spy, watching and avoiding looking into my brother's eyes. On a gloomy afternoon, as I was passing by the sitting room, I heard Loretta's voice rise. It wasn't a scream, but a poisonous whisper carrying a tone of persuasion and threat at the same time. I froze in place, holding my breath behind the slightly ajar door. She said in a sharp voice, "How long will we keep feeding and housing him, Jack? This young man consumes our resources. You must get him out of the house immediately. You are the one who manages everything, and you are the eldest heir. Your parents left the responsibility to you because you are the man, and he is just an obstacle. Get rid of him so we can live our lives in peace. The entire inheritance is yours. He has no right to share in our luxury." The words struck me like hammers. I waited to hear Jack's voice refuse, scream, tell her, "This is my brother." But, oh, the disappointment. I heard his faint, hesitant voice saying, "But dear, he's young. Where will he go?" She interrupted him sharply. "I don't care. Let him fend for himself. It's either him or me in this house, Jack. Choose now." Chills ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from the coldness of the betrayal that ran through my brother's veins. I quietly retreated to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring into space. I did not confront them at that moment. I knew the confrontation was inevitable, and I wanted to see how far my brother's submission would go. 4 days passed. 4 days of silent hell. The glances exchanged were like razor blades. On the evening of the 4th day, while I was immersed in my dark thoughts, I heard a dry knock on my door. I didn't wait for permission. The door burst open violently, and Jack entered, followed by Loretta, who stood with the arrogance of a victor. Jack's face looked pale, but his eyes were trying to feign strength. He cleared his throat and said in a voice he tried to make loud, "Ethan, we talked and we decided that the time has come for you to stand on your own 2 feet. You are now 18, and this house no longer accommodates all of us." I looked at him in shock. Although I had expected it, hearing the words from his mouth was like a dagger thrust into the heart. I stood up and said in a trembling voice, You're kicking me out, Jack, from my mother and father's house? Where am I supposed to go? I have no one but you." At this point, Loretta intervened with a look of contempt. "Stop whining like women. Be a man and take responsibility." I looked at my brother, pleading for help, but instead of softening, he exploded in anger to prove his flimsy masculinity in front of his arrogant wife. He started yelling at me, his face turning red. "Shut up! Don't argue with me in my house. Yes, I'm kicking you out. I want to rest. I want to live my life away from your responsibility. Gather your things and get out now, and I don't want to see your face here again." His shouting was proof of his weakness, a desperate attempt to please his lady. At that moment, every feeling of brotherhood died in my heart. I no longer saw my brother before me, but a stranger, an enemy. I didn't utter another word. I moved with mechanical coldness, pulling my old suitcase from under the bed and beginning to throw my few clothes into it. I took nothing to remind them of me, and nothing to remind me of them. I carried my suitcase on my shoulder and walked out of the room, then went downstairs. Loretta followed me every step of the way, her voice chasing me with insults and venomous words. "Finally, we'll get rid of this burden. Go to hell. Don't come back here begging." I reached the outer door and opened the latch, letting the cold street air rush in. Before stepping out, I stopped. I turned around slowly and looked at them one last time. Jack stood with his head bowed, while Loretta smiled triumphantly. I looked directly into her eyes, and in a calm voice, but carrying a threat heavier than mountains, I said, making sure Jack heard clearly, "Listen carefully, and you listen, you who used to be my brother. Remember this face well, and remember this moment. The day will come when you regret every minute. I will return, but not as a broken brother, but as a nightmare that will haunt your sleep. I will take severe revenge on both of you, and the days will prove it." I closed the door behind me with a force that shook the walls of the house, and I found myself on the dark street. Alone, expelled, and homeless. I walked the streets with no destination in mind. The wind slapped my face, but the fire in my chest warmed me. The fire of anger and the desire for vengeance. I felt my inner pocket where my little secret lay. $1,000, an amount I had saved and hidden long ago from holiday gifts and allowance, away from their eyes. These banknotes were my only lifeline, my bridge to survival. I walked a long distance until I left the upscale neighborhood and reached a modest area. I found a cheap boarding house with a dilapidated sign. I went in and paid the rent for a small room for a week in advance. The room was miserable, its walls peeling and smelling of dampness, but at that moment, it was my private palace because it was free from Loretta and Jack. I threw down my suitcase and immediately went out to buy food. I bought a heavy meal and sat down, eating with an eagerness and gluttony I hadn't known. as if taking revenge for the days of hunger and deprivation. That night, I slept on the dilapidated bed, and for the first time since my parents died, I slept soundly. I wasn't afraid. I was determined. In the morning, I woke up with the sun of a new day filtering through the dirty window. I stood before the cracked mirror and told myself, "Today, your life begins, Ethan. No room for weakness. Work is your weapon." I put on my clothes and immediately went out looking for any work that would spare me the humiliation of begging, and my feet led me towards a massive construction site belonging to a contracting company. And there, midst the dust and noise, was my true beginning. I stood before that massive iron gate of the construction company, the sounds of machines and the roar of trucks filling the air with noise. It was noisy, yes, but for me, it was 1,000 times kinder than the silence of my old, desolate home, and more honorable than hearing Loretta's voice condescendingly granting me a bite to eat. I advanced with firm steps towards the foreman, a large man named Mike. I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "I want work, any work. I'm not afraid of hard labor." He looked at me, examining my physique, which had not yet hardened, then pointed his rough hand towards a pile of cement bags. "Show me what you've got, boy. Move that pile to the second floor." I didn't hesitate for a moment. I took off my jacket and started working. The bags were heavy, biting into my shoulders and cutting my soft hands, which were unused to roughness. But every time I lifted a bag, I imagined I was lifting the humiliation of begging off my back. My sweat mixed with the dust, and with every drop of sweat that fell, I felt I was cleansing myself of my painful past. Days passed, and days turned into months. I wasn't just a worker carrying bricks and cement. I was an apt student in the school of harsh life. I observed the carpenters carving wood, the blacksmiths shaping iron, and the electricians laying power networks. I worked during the day, and in the evening, I read about construction engineering and interior design in books I borrowed from the public library. My soft hands turned into solid blocks full of scars, and my mind became a treasury filled with the secrets of construction. Mike noticed my passion and dedication, and he began to rely on me for delicate tasks. I was no longer that expelled young man. I had become Ethan the professional, the man who found a solution to any problem on the site. On a gloomy autumn morning, Mike called me into his office. He said to me seriously, "Ethan, there is a very important client in one of Chicago's most prestigious neighborhoods. He owns a huge villa and needs comprehensive and precise maintenance, and I don't trust any of these fools to do this job but you. You are meticulous and work conscientiously. Are you ready?" I smiled confidently and said, "I am up to the task, sir." I headed to the mentioned address. It was a luxurious villa, pleasing to the eye, with lush gardens and a wonderful classical architectural design. For a moment, I felt a pang in my heart, for it reminded me of my childhood home, of the prosperity that had been stolen from me. But I shook off those thoughts and started working immediately. The villa needed renovations to its antique wooden decorations and repairs to its infrastructure. I immersed myself in my work with all my senses. I wasn't just working to get paid. I was working because I loved seeing broken things return to life, perhaps because I was trying to repair myself by repairing this house. Days passed while I worked in silence and perfection, until a day came when I was busy repairing a rare wooden frieze in the guest lounge. I was treating it gently, like one treating a wound, and I didn't notice the man who had been standing behind me, watching me in silence for some time. I have never seen anyone treat wood with this much respect before. I turned around suddenly to find a man in his 60s with dignified features, wearing simple clothes that nevertheless hinted at immense wealth. It was William, the owner of the villa. I stood up, dusted off my hands, and said respectfully, "Sir, I didn't notice your presence. Wood is like people. If you treat it harshly, it breaks, and if you treat it gently and kindly, it gives you the best of what it has. William smiled broadly, and a genuine sparkle of admiration appeared in his eyes. He said to me, "You are not just a maintenance worker, my son. You are an artist, and you have a philosophy that many people lack. What is your name?" "Ethan, sir." From that moment, a strange relationship developed between us. He came every day to watch my work, and we would exchange conversations. I told him about my passion for architecture and about my vision for how to transform mute buildings into vibrant places. I did not tell him about my personal tragedy, for I did not want pity. I wanted respect, and I received it. On the last day of work, after I had completed the task perfectly, making the villa look like a new masterpiece, William invited me to sit with him on the porch overlooking the garden. He poured me coffee himself and looked at me with a deep, prolonged gaze. Then he said a sentence that changed the course of history for me. "Ethan, I have been watching you for the past few weeks. I saw in you rare honesty, exceptional skill, and a mind that weighs mountains. I am an old man. I own money and land, but I am tired of running, and I need young blood boiling with ambition like yours." He paused for a moment, and my heart began to pound intensely. Then he continued, placing his hand on my shoulder, "What do you say to stopping the owner-employee relationship? I want to offer you a partnership. We will build real estate together. I will provide the capital and the connections, and you will provide the experience, the management, and your art of construction. We will establish a company where we are partners. Do you accept?" I was stunned. Was I dreaming? The young man who was expelled in his old clothes with $1,000 is now being offered a partnership with one of Chicago's wealthiest men? I remembered Loretta and Jack. I remembered them expelling me. I remembered my vow of revenge. I realized that God had opened the door through which I would return victorious. I looked into William's eyes steadily, extended my rough hand to shake his, and said with a voice filled with certainty, "Yes, Mr. William, I want that. And we will make this company an empire on which the sun never sets." That handshake was the solemn covenant. I began to gather the workers whose competence and honesty I had known, Mike and other skilled craftsmen, and we started our first project, a large residential building. I poured all my experience, all my resentment, and all my dreams into it. I slept on the site, supervising every nail that was driven and every brick that was laid. Day after day, and brick upon brick, the building began to rise to embrace the sky, and with it, Ethan's name rose in the world of real estate, and the real journey towards the peak and towards the promised day began. That handshake with William on that luxurious porch was the starting point that transformed my life from an expelled boy into a partner in building a massive future. We named our company Phoenix Builders, a name that was not just a brand, but embodied my story, emerging from the ashes of bitterness and pain into the light of greatness and achievement. The partnership between us was golden by all standards. William had his massive capital, his extensive connections that reached decision-makers in major cities, and his unparalleled wisdom. And I had my youth, my technical skills acquired through the sweat of my brow, my relentless passion, and my determination for success fueled by the ghost of revenge. I worked tirelessly, slept in my office, and supervised every detail on the site. My goal was not just money, but building a monument to prove to Jack and Loretta that dignity is more precious than inheritance, and that being expelled was the fuel for my launch. The first project, the large apartment building, was not only built, but all its units were sold before completion. The reason was not solely the design, but the quality and precision that was unprecedented in the market. Our motto was, "We build homes for living, not just properties for profit." We expanded at lightning speed, from one building in Chicago to residential complexes in Miami, and then commercial towers in New York. Within only 5 years, Phoenix Builders became one of the most successful and influential real estate companies in the United States. My personal wealth exceeded everything my parents had owned combined. The name Ethan was no longer just echoed in construction workshops, but began to grace the covers of specialized magazines. I remember the first time I saw my picture on the cover of American Real Estate Titans magazine. My picture filled the paper, with my face covered in firmness and dignity and my confident gaze. I kept that copy, not for pride, but to remind myself of the depth of the decline from which my ascent began, and because I knew that these newspapers would one day reach the hands of those who wished poverty and humiliation upon me. In the meantime, I was silently observing what was happening in the lives of my brother and his wife from afar. I used my connections and resources to find out the finest details about their financial situation. Revenge to me was like a dish served cold after being cooked slowly and meticulously. While I was living in a frantic race for achievement, Jack and Loretta were living in a frantic race for extravagance. Loretta was spending money foolishly and arrogantly. Aimless trips around the world, buying exorbitant jewelry, hosting endless loud parties in my parents' home, which she treated as a private hotel. She believed that my parents' wealth was inexhaustible, spending extravagantly, which didn't even match the inheritance. As for Jack, he had turned into nothing more than a docile signing machine for his wife. He had no idea how to manage my father's company, which had flourished thanks to their wisdom, so he completely neglected it. Profits turned into losses, and the business relationships my parents had painstakingly built collapsed. Loretta pressured him to mortgage the properties and lands to finance her extravagant lifestyle, and he signed without thinking. Financial problems began to pile up like icebergs. The bank deposits they thought were endless dried up. Banks began demanding debts and mortgage interest they had taken out. The loud parties turned into daily arguments between Jack and Loretta, with her blaming him for his weak character and poor management, and him blaming her for her relentless extravagance. They were forced to sell my parents' possessions piece by piece, but this time the sale was not calm. It was a forced sale to pay off accumulated debts. Even the company that was my parents' pride closed its doors after Jack failed to pay employees' salaries and tax obligations. Within only 8 years of my expulsion, the golden mansion that was my home turned into a tight financial cage. The house from which they had expelled me was seized, and they became threatened with imprisonment due to manipulation of the financial records of the collapsing company. In photos published by some local newspapers about their financial collapse, I saw how Jack had turned into an old man before his time, and how Loretta had lost her sparkle, showing signs of exhaustion and worry. I saw all this while standing on top of the world. I owned a fleet of cars and lived in a mansion no less than Williams. But I didn't feel complete victory yet, because revenge is not about watching the fall from afar, but about the moment of decisive confrontation. I knew that with their arrogance, they would only ask for help when the cruelest despair touched them. The time had come. On a sunny day, I was at the site of my largest project, a towering residential skyscraper in the heart of the city, resembling a lighthouse illuminating the darkness. I was wearing a safety helmet and observing the workers with unerring precision until my personal bodyguard, who always accompanied me for my protection, came to me and said in a low voice, "Mr. Ethan, there are 2 people at the gate urgently requesting to meet you. The man says he is your brother and that he is in major financial trouble, him and his wife." I froze in place for a moment. This was the moment I had waited for many long years. A very cold smile drew across my face. I ordered the guard in a calm and decisive tone. "Let them in, and don't tell any of the workers who they are. Bring them to my temporary office here on the site." My heart was pounding strongly, but my mind was calm like the surface of a lake on a moonlit night. I would receive them in my new kingdom, a kingdom I built with my blood and tears while they were gobbling up my parents' money. The hour of truth has arrived, and the time has come to fulfill the vow I made to myself when I was expelled into the street. My temporary office at the construction site was located on the 15th floor, overlooking the Chicago skyline. Its design was simple yet reflective of authority. A massive glass desk, a luxurious leather chair, and behind me, a giant image of the tower we were building. I stood by the window, looking down, awaiting the arrival of the unwelcome visitors. My heart wasn't pounding with anger, it was beating with the quiet conviction that justice was coming. Minutes later, there was a knock on the door. The guard entered, followed by the two of them. The shock of seeing them in that state was greater than I had anticipated. I no longer saw Jack, my handsome older brother who used to smile at me. Instead, I saw a withdrawn man, his clothes shabby, looking helpless and fearful. As for Loretta, her arrogant gaze had melted, turning into a look of pleading and humiliation, her face pale and her leather bag looking old and torn. They sat before me hesitantly while I stood silent, allowing the weight of the place and the magnitude of my achievement to press down on them. Jack began to speak in a voice close to a whisper, his eyes not daring to look directly into mine. "Ethan, welcome. I am sorry to bother you, but we are in trouble, with no way out. The bank wants to put me in jail. We couldn't pay the debts after our company collapsed. We need help. We need money." I looked at them, and I couldn't stop myself from laughing. It wasn't a laugh of joy or pleasure, but a laugh of mockery and cold anger. It was a resonant laugh that came from the depths of 8 years of oppression. I sat down slowly behind my desk, rested my elbows on it, and spoke with deadly calm. "Trouble? Since when do the well-off ask me for help? Have you forgotten that I am the burden that must be gotten rid of?" Jack became flustered and stammered. "Ethan, please, I was young. I didn't know what I was doing. Loretta manipulated me. We are now on the verge of the abyss." At that moment, Loretta raised her head, trying to reclaim some of her old arrogance for a second, and said weakly, "Ethan, we are family after all. The money you are asking for is very little compared to your wealth, and your father would have wanted to help us." At this, I couldn't longer hold back. I struck the desk with my hand with a force that made the pen jump from its place, and I stood up, speaking words that emerged like electrical bolts. "You talk about my father? Which father are you talking about? You who forbade me my simplest rights in his house? Do you remember, Loretta, when you screamed in my face in the kitchen, leaving me hungry, gnawed by hunger in the middle of the night? Do you remember how you followed me while I was expelled onto the street, cursing me with the foulest words? Everything that belonged to me by law and by brotherhood, you took in cold blood. And now, after you have gone bankrupt, you come to ask me, the burden, for salvation?" Loretta's face went pale, and she trembled without uttering a single word. As for Jack, he was staring at his feet, realizing that their role was over. I continued speaking, looking directly at Jack. "On the day you kicked me out of my father's house, yelling to prove your false masculinity to your wife, I swore to myself that I was no longer your brother. I walked alone, and I built this empire with my own rough hands, while you two were spending my inheritance on frivolous nights out and travel. I did not succeed to help you. I succeeded to erase you from my memory and my life forever." I reached out and pressed the guard's call button, then looked at them with a coldness they had never known from me. "The guard will escort you out. This is the end of the story between us. I do not want to see you anywhere I am, or near my office or any of my company's properties. Your role in my life is over, just as my story with you has ended forever." At that moment, the massive guard entered. Loretta tried to plead in a choked voice, "Ethan, please, don't do this to us." But I turned my back and returned to the window. I felt the guard's hand on their shoulders, and I heard the sound of their heavy footsteps receding from the office. When the door closed, absolute silence prevailed. I sighed deeply, a sigh marking the end of retribution. I didn't feel overwhelming joy, but rather a strange calmness. The past no longer pulled me back. I had fulfilled my vow, and I had achieved a justice that was more important than money. I returned to my desk and began reviewing the business plans for the new tower. For me, Jack and Loretta no longer existed. They had become part of the ashes of the past from which the Phoenix Fire was launched. Dear friends, if this story has touched your hearts, do not forget to support us by subscribing to the channel so that we may continue together to reveal more realistic and touching stories. Thank you for your kind viewership, and see you soon in a new tale.